today's session is for us to all have a chance to talk, to discuss, to share. So it's really lovely that we have so many people join Ignacio and I for a chat this afternoon. So Ignacio, is there anything that you'd like to start us off with, a thought, a suggestion based on what people have discussed in the classroom?
No, not beyond what I already put in the in my video. Oh, sorry, there's a noise, is there? Just started. I'll say something and I'll mute myself. Not beyond what I've already put in my video. And what I really want to do is challenge the idea that privacy is all about information. It's much broader than information. It's identity, and sometimes there's no new information, and yet we don't want something to be made public. So it's more than the sum of information. That's the essential point I wanted to bring across. And linked with that then is the idea that the tech giants that take all this information from us win, I think, precisely because our information or our little insights about us, they've broken down in such small, minute quantities, right? That I bought this book, that I like this movie, that I emailed someone, that each individual bit of data seems unobjectionable. But it's the bigger, the sum, the total is much more than the sum of the parts. So I think we feel more challenged than, in our privacy than ever before, not because there are more people interested in knowing more about us or shaping their ideas of us, but rather because they can do that in much smaller, minute quantities that go either undetected or that seem objectionable because it's such small little amounts. So that's really, I think that's what's changed. Before, if someone wanted to violate my privacy, they had to break into my house and observe me at my home, or use binoculars from across and see everything that I'm doing in my own home, or something like that. So what were the equivalents of these privacy threats in a pre-digital world? They're fairly intrusive things. Whereas in the digital world, it's very small amount at a time that you barely have the time to notice or care about, but the accumulation of that is very significant. So that's what I tried to convey in the video. Be very curious to hear people's reactions to that.
So over to you, community. Has anybody got any thoughts, questions, ideas they'd like to share with us? You're very welcome to unmute yourself or pop your hand up. Masud, your hand up. I'm going to go to Masud and then you, Fahad.
Thank you very much. Hi, it's 7 p.m. in Bangladesh. So good evening to you all, and good morning and good afternoon, applicable for my colleague. So thank you, Ignacio. You raise a very important point of recent days privacy system, because I just read in article where it is written then that every 2 years all the digital data around the globe is doubling in every 2 years. So we are actually creating data. We are usually creating the digital footprint, and it is not only information related to the digital ID, but also the information related to very small issue, as you told. You told, we are creating everywhere, and this data actually create the privacy issues and misuse sometimes. And as you know, the privacy issues interrelated with the things like data protection, then trust, then breaching of data, cyber security issue. So all the things actually create a multiple complex layer around the privacy issues. For example, I can say one thing, like everyone is using Google. We are mailing them, and sometimes maybe in every month or in every year or in every quarter, you got some reports from Google, like in this month, you visited this place, these cities, around 40 cities you have visited this month, around 20 cities, around 10 countries you have visited. So this small piece of data actually, also issue of privacy, exposing your travel pattern, exposing your location, geolocation. So, and this sort of data can be hacked, breached, and you might face some problem, inconvenience. So these things actually happen. And this is just because of explosion of data. I should say explosion of data. And it's really hard to manage the privacy because of such explosion of data. Thank you.
Thank you, Masud. The explosion is huge. That is, I think, one of the things that digitalization, for sure, has brought the vastness, the quickness, the easiness that data can be shared, collected on us has been huge. Gavin, Ignacio, I can see if any of you have any points you'd like to make to jump in as well with response to this, the discussions.
Sarah, I came in a few minutes late, so I'm going to need to wait until I've got the gist of the conversation before.
No problem, but welcome. It's nice to have you on the call.
No, I mean, totally agree with Masud. I mean, everything is a function of demand and supply, right? I mean, that's what every economist will tell you. And what is changed with digital is the supply side of available information. Getting information is so easy. And that then makes particular use of information that before were of a marginal benefit given the cost now seem entirely reasonable. And that's really what's happening behind a lot of the surveillance threats, whether from government or from corporate, is that, well, it's just too easy now. And so, okay, if it's easy to do, why not? I'm going to find a reason to justify it later on, or just some vague threat of we'll keep you safer and that kind of stuff justifies the very small cost of collecting that information. So it's really the supply side, how costless it has become to gather that information that has changed the landscape. So there's not any fundamental change on the demand side. We still demand the same privacy and the same security, the same everything as before, but now things that were before were not justifiable now become very justifiable from an purely economic grounds. So yeah, it's the explosion of data that is changing everything.
And Fahad, I know you had a comment or question, so we'll come to you next. Fahad?
You have to unmute. No.
We can hear you.
Yes. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Fahad. I think Fahad might be struggling with his internet connection. So Fahad, we'll come back to you, hopefully when you rejoin the session.
I think it's just being very private.
That doesn't sound like the Fahad we know, who loves to talk to DFI and to share with us as well. So hopefully he'll join us back on the call. Esselina, you put a notion in the chat. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit more about your issues around where privacy domain might start and stop.
Yeah, thanks, Sada. Thanks, Ignacio. Yeah, good afternoon for everyone. This issue of privacy is bringing me many things in my mind, because sometimes we don't know where, sometimes we don't know where the privacy might be start and where stopping, particularly when there is a data provider in the middle. So we don't know to what extent the provider is having access to my data if it is treating my data with the privacy. And when it's coming to a country like Mozambique, where it is not yet data privacy law, it's getting even more vulnerable. So I just want to understand from you, as you might have some experience in this whole movement of privacy, because it seemed to me that sometimes we are pushing too much to the issue of privacy. And when I try to reconnect with some cultural aspect of privacy, really, what are we talking in some culture when we talk about the data privacy? Because there are some data for some culture, it's not the issue of privacy. Are we not trying to push and where the culture domain is coming? So I do have so many things in my head that is making me sometimes confused when we're talking about the privacy data, what we really means and what are we expecting for the consumer or the people who are giving the data that need to be treated with all respect.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of the big cultural dimension in terms of how we express our desire for privacy, what we're sensitive about and not. But I think the drive for privacy is not cultural, it's how it manifests itself, how it expresses itself. I think that's where you see the cultural dimension. Just to give you an example, it is often said, and I hear this very often, that this privacy and data from Google and so on is more of a Western mindset thing, and it probably is in that particular manifestation. But that's not to say that Africans don't have any sense of privacy. In fact, they express it in ways that in the West we don't have. Like, for example, and I've noted very often, I don't know how generalizable this is across African cultures, but very often the husband and the wife have no idea how much each other might make, how much money the other one makes, which in a Western culture would be quite unacceptable. So you even have privacy within the household to an extent that we have less of in the West, I think. So again, the cultural is very important, but the culture is how it manifests itself, how you make the linkage between your sense of personal identity and how you want others to perceive you. And perhaps we have different sensitivities, but I think the issue of privacy is, I think, universal. Now, when it comes to specifically online privacy from the Googles and the Facebooks of this world, that could very well be that is more important in some cultures than others. But the underlying issue, I think, is universal.
I agree that the bottom line of privacy is universal. When I was thinking on privacy, I was not thinking that example that you give, because for me that one is nothing to do with culture. It's more to do with the personality. I was thinking, for instance, it's for some people or here in my country, it's acceptable when I'm giving my data to a bank or to a government institution. I do not care what they're going to do with my data, because I believe that how can you say, institution that I do have trust with them. They're not going to do bad things with my data. So I'm not asking them to give them permission to use my data, because I assume that institution that is this kind of thinking that I was trying to bring in the culture domain. Whereas in Europe, for instance, you needed to give permission to use. I needed to give you permission to take my data and to use them. In this case, we just take for given that that institution has the right to use my data for that purpose that it think is going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's trust, then all of these issues go away. I trust you to do the right thing for me. So I think these issues manifest themselves when there isn't a presumption of trust. It could be that some people have a presumption of trust of banks and government, and others don't. So I think that becomes a very personal choice. Who do you trust or not? And it's possible that Europe has gone further through GDPR in seeking consents and so on, because there's less of a presumption that you're going to be trusting your online intermediaries and online service providers. So yeah, it could be that on average, Europeans are less trusting, which probably has to do with a lot of history, a lot of bad things that have happened in Europe in terms of abuses and so on. So it's possible that that's a cultural element as well. But I would say it's a bit like freedom of speech, right? I don't need a constitutional protection to say whatever I want if all I'm going to do is say nice things about everyone. So I don't need a legal protection to flatter. What I need a legal protection is to insult. So I mean, the freedom of speech is precisely the freedom to say negative things about people, the things that people are not going to like. Because if you're going to say things that people are going to like all the time, you don't need a freedom of speech constitutional right. So these rights are always protecting the worst situations, if you like, when there's no trust, when you're not happy, and so on. So for the best cases to handle themselves, there's always the worst cases that all these protections need to be in for.
Okay, thank you. I think.
Hi, Sarah.
Sure.
Fahad, I'm just going to connect because there's one point that connects directly to that, and then unless your point connects directly to what Esselina was sharing. I'll connect to you, Fahad.
Yes.
I finished mine.
Okay, thanks, Esselina. Fahad?
Okay, I just want to contribute in the concept of privacy that for me, privacy is about your inner self, your core existence. It's very important for you. I want to share, I have a feedback that due to the polls, normally people, they are very much concerned about privacy. But when they use a platform, they usually do not consider privacy as important, as Elena mentioned. Even myself, I am very much concerned about my privacy, or I link it to my creativity as well. But when these platforms become so useful and so convenient that we usually just go with the flow. I just wanted to tell you that I have observed something that the era of 1990s to 2001, before the Googles of this world, the business model was entirely different. And with the current model after Google and Facebook, the business model has changed. So the most important thing which is connected to this concept of privacy is the business model behind it. So if we strongly feel that the business model lets us use these platforms, irrespective that we are very much concerned about our privacy, which for myself is very much related to creativity as well, because these things influence my thought process, my daily behaviors as well, and control me in a sense. With the current COVID-19 situation, as very many people are seeing that maybe we will be entering in a new world. So it's more important that this is a fact that big data is there, everything is being captured, but the better way is to do it through a more decentralized mechanism, or a business model needs to be reinvented in which the person giving the data has some rewards as well. So I want to focus on the point that the business model is the real devil.
Yeah.
Ignacio, you're in agreement with Fahad?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to pick up on what Fahad, you said, what Esselina also said, and interestingly, Candice from Tanzania also said in the chat around the concept of trust. So we do trust some people with our data and not others. That might influence our view of how private we wish to be or don't want to be. So Candice, I'm not sure if, are you still with us, Candice?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
Excellent. Tell us more about what you shared.
I think my point was more about the benefit, the perceived benefit that people are receiving. Like, I think it was Fahad who was talking about, we are sharing data, but we need to receive a reward. What we don't realize is that our use of the service is the reward. I mean, that's the business model we're talking about, right? You get a free service, you think it's free, but you are actually paying with your data. It's acceptable because we perceive that the benefit that we are receiving is bigger than what we are actually sharing. And it's the same thing that I was watching the news and they were talking to people in South Korea, and there's a lot of coverage on how South Korea is actually tracking how people are meeting each other through obviously GPS data and everything. And they were talking to people and asking them, like, doesn't this bother you, and are you not concerned about this? So a lot of the people, they didn't really say that they trust the government. What they said was that they are using this information to help us. So they are using it to protect us, to reduce the pandemic and reduce the cases. So people are saying that, okay, we understand that what they're doing is an invasion of privacy. I mean, they're tracking where we go, who we are meeting, the types of things that we're doing during the day. But at this point of time, the benefit to us is greater than what we are sharing. So it's not something that we should be concerned about right now. And I think that our attitude to privacy changes. I mean, somebody was mentioning the 90s. I mean, in the 90s, they would ask us to leave email addresses at shops, right? Because those were the days where you got newsletters about promotions and everything. And I used to hate doing that, yeah? Because next thing you know, your email box is full of junk. But you tell them, okay, I'll give you a little discount and you leave me your email address. And suddenly your attitude changes. You say, wait a minute, what's the problem? I'll get a few emails, maybe I'll just block them later on. So at that point of time, you make that decision, the benefit as opposed to sharing a little bit of information that I have. So I don't think it's okay. Trust is one factor, but I think the benefit that we receive also influences how we perceive it. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing, Candice.
Can I just say on that? I mean, that's the fundamental economics that has changed. And when the cost of getting the data is very little, the benefit can also be very little. So just one, well-targeted suggestion of a movie is enough to us to want to share the data, right? So that's a problem. Everything becomes so small, so incremental that we lose sight of the big picture of what's changing through all of this. So I mean, I totally agree with you. What I'm saying is, when the cost becomes very little, and the incremental benefit also can be very, very little, and we go along with it. And that's a bit of a trap. I'm not saying necessarily it's a bad thing, but we kind of go along with that for that reason. And let's hear more views.
I was also going to suggest that, I know that we trust different people and we trust different brands differently. So for some, the scandals that hit Facebook, for example, meant maybe people deleting Facebook profiles or not wanting to share information with Facebook. But other people, platforms like Facebook are a trusted brand. And if we do perceive a benefit of using it, for example, for me, I know the risks of Facebook, but I have friends around the globe. For me, it's worth having a Facebook account so I can more easily keep in touch with them. But it is very true. Like, I share photos of my life on there without necessarily thinking about the cumulative effect. So my goodness, I wonder how many photos Facebook actually now has of me over the years. And all of us, I'm sure some of us may not want to be remembered, of the earlier ones. We don't want that reminder too. But we do give every little bit we give creates a much larger piece of information that's held about us. I'm going to pop across to Kevin. Kevin, Bank of Kigali, Kevin. Welcome to the conversation. Have you got something to join, learn, contribute, please?
Thank you, Sarah. This is Kevin here, and it's great to be part of the conversation and to see some familiar faces. I think it's been a while since I met Gavin, and so
great to have you on the call, Kevin.
Yeah. So my question, I don't know if it's really a question or a challenge, but I think the whole privacy thing. I think the number one culprit among all of it, I think it starts with all of us, and I personally struggle with this. And this is, do I have my own privacy policy, for instance? If we are questioning about privacy of systems or the products that we are using, which means we are the product being sold, if it's free, so I'm being sold wherever, I'm using that platform. But the question is, when I use these platforms, do I have a way I can check if my private or my privacy policy personal is actually meeting the needs or the requirement of me using that particular platform, or whether I'm buying it or maybe I'm using it for free. And I think this is maybe where we individuals who are in this particular industry, and from a consumer protection, we need to start putting demands and say, give me this visibility where I can be able to put my own policy, and I can cross-check if across the platform, at least it meets. If it doesn't meet, then why should I subscribe? Maybe I'll move to something else. So I think for me, the challenge to myself and to everyone, I think privacy is very huge. I think we need to start bringing it down to an individual level, to a family level, virtually, of course, for every place we work. I just know, I wouldn't wish that this becomes just like we have this enormous discussion about big data and cloud, and everything just becomes a very big buzzword. But I think it all boils down back to we individuals. How do we define this privacy? As we have seen that in every culture, every country, every part of the world, things are different. So my wish for any platform or any phone I use or any computer I use, if there was a way I can plug in my policy checklist and say, let me just see if this platform complies to my own personal privacy. But so that's a little bit of a challenge to myself and maybe to everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, and I think that's a little bit what David was alluding to in his video as well. I mean, we're not going to solve this just through disclosures and consents when those are not practical. So what I need as a citizen, as an individual with my own set of preferences and tastes on privacy and identity and whatever, which need not be like everybody else, is some agent that is working on my behalf, doing two things. First is scrutinizing the privacy policies of those services that I come into contact with before I actually do, and saying, is it acceptable or not, doing it on my behalf. And secondly, negotiating. It's like, well, okay, I mean, Ignacio will be ready to go to your website if you waive this element of your terms and conditions, because it's not acceptable to him. And then the other provider can decide whether they want to accommodate or not. So I need something that kind of filters things according to my preferences and negotiates on my behalf to turn things into things that are more acceptable to me. Now, what is this agent? There's two possibilities. One is an automated agent, some kind of artificial intelligence that works on my behalf, which really would bring equality back into the picture, because Google has lots of artificial intelligence working, quote unquote, against me. I should be able to have my artificial intelligence that works against Google's, and the two AIs talk to each other and negotiate and disclose and so on. But it's hard to imagine that one, because Google's AI works very well because it aggregates data on so many thousands or millions of people, whereas, my AI, on what data will I train it? How's the AI going to learn what it is that I want? So the other possibility is this agent is not an automated engine, but rather it's an organization that I trust, and that's what David was talking about. I forget what he called them, the privacy intermediaries, and I sign up to one who then implements the policies that I've agreed with it on my behalf. So those are very much more active and also personalizable ways of dealing with privacy that I think work a lot better, or will work a lot better than just across the board rules on what is acceptable, what is not, and so on. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Kevin.
I also really enjoyed the idea of having our own personal data, privacy policy. Okay, we can look, and we should look to governments and regulators and organizations to give us options on our privacy, but maybe we also need to be more informed and take some responsibilities and some choice back into our own hands where we can. But I think it is quite difficult sometimes. If we want to use certain services, we do sometimes have to give our data. We don't necessarily always have that choice, but I love that concept and idea, Kevin, thank you. And I'm going to skip over now to Joseph Kibrit. So you've got your hand up. So I'd love to hear what you'd like to contribute to the discussion. Joseph. I'm just you need to unmute yourself, Joseph. We can't hear you. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank
Wonderful.
You. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ignacio. Thank you, Zara. Privacy to me is something I own about me, which I want to share or may not. So privacy to me is relative. It depends upon the environment also. So in some environment, privacy for people, very piece of information may be private. In some environment, many information becomes private. It depends upon the situation. Suppose if you take your name, you're not bothered about your name, about your privacy. When it comes to account balance, it becomes private for every person. So it is dependent on the situations. So it also depends upon the cultures. It also depends about the law, the person who lives in that country. That also depends on the privacy. So privacy also it is sometimes you secure yourself by being private or by making your information private. So it depends upon the environment. So privacy, it works. If you keep your privacy in some environment, you safely live. So it works for me. So accordingly, you expose your privacy. You'll not live or you'll not expose your privacy simply. So privacy, it works for me according to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. And I think you've expressed what makes it so difficult to actually talk about privacy or design rules and regulations and policy on it, because it does vary each person's perspective, each person's view, and it can change within seconds depending on what we think it's going to be used. So it's insightful thing to share.
Sarah?
Yes, Ignacio.
Salman brought up some different aspects of it, and he lowered his hand. We're not going to let him just lower his hand, are we?
I don't think so. I was just going to come to that one. That was next on my list. Salman, please do share. You've popped a few questions in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. Don't be shy. You've unmuted yourself. We know you're there.
Oh, that was okay. I just dropped my points because I was fearing that I might forget them. So yeah, I didn't know if it was a bit early to point towards what I had in mind regarding digital privacy and of course the behavioral biometrics. So before moving towards behavioral biometrics, just want to say that what Fahad and Candice were discussing. So yeah, regarding sharing data with government or bank or financial institutions or even tech firms, people tend to be quite conducive of sharing data. And it might not be the culture, and as rightly pointed out that it usually has to do with the benefits, and which might be extending from FI services to using say Facebook Connect and Google ID for SSONs. So that's that I had in mind. And yeah, I was hoping if someone kind of elaborates what would be the implications of behavioral biometrics on privacy once we move into behavioral biometrics, because I'm working in a financial service provider, so we kind of are working on behavioral biometrics. And as of now, even if we look at GDPR, we are kind of silent over what behavioral biometrics, how behavioral biometrics might impact digital privacy. So I'm hoping someone would help me in that.
Any thoughts for Salman?
Sorry, Salman, hi, it's Candice here. Could you specify exactly what you mean by behavioral biometrics?
Well, behavioral biometrics is, it's not just that, let me try to explain with an example. Like for instance, if I am logging into my internet banking portal or my mobile app, so instead of just having a PIN or Face ID, it kinds of, my app is gonna create a digital or a biometric profile against within my app. So that's it is gonna check. It is gonna create a trend of when I'm gonna log my location, plus how I scroll down through the app and stuff like that, and how even I hold my phone. So plus, if I'm moving this particular thing to desktop or say the internet banking portal, again there are some matrices that I'm gonna include in that digital signature or digital profile that I'm gonna create for that particular user. So that's kind of what behavioral biometrics is.
Okay, cool, thanks.
So some online credit providers say they take that into account in their credit scoring in the absence of more data. I mean, basically, anything that is digital, they're going to see whether it correlates with repaying loans or not. Anything. It doesn't need to be a prior logic, but if the speed of typing correlates with who repays a loan, they'll use that. So that kind of a little bit illustrates the dangers of privacy. So I'm not concerned that the online credit provider learns that I'm a poor typer, a fast typer, or a slow typer. But imagine that my speed of typing matches statistically, for whatever reason, what fraudsters type. Then I'm categorized as a fraudster, which, you know, it's like you use my data to categorize me as a fraudster simply because it correlates. Is that good enough? I'm just making that up, making up that example, but just to illustrate, I think what Fahad was also saying in the chat, that the problem with data privacy is not that you get my data, it's all the inferences that you make with my data. And if those inferences are going to come back and bite me, well, you know, maybe that's an issue. So privacy is always about protecting how others interpret who you are, interpret what you do, and so on. So if you have access to my data and you know, through some kind of credit, or not just credit scoring, I mean, any kind of algorithm, you think that I fit in a demographic of 5-year-olds, you're going to treat me like a 5-year-old. And it's simply because some data correlated with 5-year-old, whatever that data is. And no one will ever know what that data is. No one has any interest in figuring out what that data is. The fact is, now I'm categorized as a 5-year-old. And so I'm going to be exposed to all the things that are shown to 5-year-olds. So I think that is the real issue with online privacy, is when you're using the data against me to miss what, in my opinion, is mischaracterizing me and limiting, therefore, what I can do. You cannot get a loan because your typing speed is such. You cannot get good content because I think you're like a 5-year-old. So that's a bit where I see the issue being, is how you use the data against me is where it starts biting, rather than just general access to data. Fahad, does that capture your view too? I mean,
yes, absolutely. And I just want to, I take 2 minutes. It's about as you have told, it's the exploitation of the data which I am worried about. Otherwise, it's okay. In fact, it's almost 4 times when I felt that I should, due to some, the comparison factor, what is happening with my family, what is really the COVID-19 depression mode of news, everybody is helpless. I logged out of Facebook almost 2 times. But eventually I went back because it's so part of my life, because I want to share things. That's my nature. I want to just want to tell you that a few people are working on the concept of decentralized internet, or the business model to be changed. If I know there is a protocol called Open Index Protocol, and they are launching their Alexandria browser. So I am in contact with them and learning more about their concept. But there are people working on, and Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is the founder of World Wide Web, have given good regards to their team. So that's why I am really interested, because being a person of 90s, when I was young, I felt the same way which those founders did. That 90s were very different, and the things got changed due to the incentive and business model, which we have ignored, and now we are feeling the bite. So the good thing is that there are practical applications which are being developed to counter this.
Thanks, Fahad. I think I'm going to go and search for a little bit more information about that. I'm curious to know more. Maybe you can, if you have a link or something, you can pop it into the chat so that we can all go and do a little research.
but in a sense, all that is an attempt to go back to what the internet was supposed to be at the very beginning. It was supposed to be this peer-to-peer decentralized thing. There's no gatekeepers. And for many years, it wasn't clear which way the internet was going to go, whether it was going to favorite individuals or corporations. And now we know.
Dave, I saw that you unmuted yourself, and you also put some interesting questions in the chat regarding third parties and sharing, and not necessarily knowing that when we share our data with one person that they're then going to share it with others. Would you like to tell us a little bit of your views? Dave, Nero, are you there? Okay, maybe we've lost Dave. We'll come back to Dave, but I can see that Ammar, you have your hand up. So would you like to join us and share your views?
Yes, hi everyone. Glad to be here and listening to this interesting discussion. So in the context of mobile financial services, the privacy domain in general actually has rules that govern how data processors manage data of data subjects, which are you and me in this case. So do you think that mobile money service providers should have data protection officers that actually apply the rules of data privacy to transactions that are sometimes peer-to-peer or between institutions and customers. How is that going to be governed, Ignacio?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Or rather a point. I mean, data privacy largely has been solved as regards licensed banks and financial institutions. You know, there's a confidentiality requirement that they have. But there's two things, caveats to that. So they themselves are solved. The problem is, if by financial inclusion we want to drag people into the digital economy, and a consequence of that is that they buy more stuff online and sell more stuff online and make electronic payments for things, participate in the digital payments world, we're dragging them into a world of less privacy automatically, not because the bank or the payment provider that they have will reveal that information, but the other side, right? The seller or the buyer, depending on which side the client is in. So by dragging people into digital payments, we're exposing them to privacy issues with the counterparts, not necessarily with the financial institutions that are bound by confidentiality. And of course, let's recognize that the other party that has gained a lot from all of this is the government. The confidentiality rules don't necessarily apply to government when it comes to banking, because they feel now that it's easy to get all the financial information about everyone, then why not? So those are the two, I think, areas that present privacy issues to people when they're new to the digital world that weren't exposed before, the government knowing a lot more about them. And of course, here I'm thinking about the majority of informal workers who had no relation paying taxes and all that kind of stuff, as well as with all the e-commerce platforms that stand between their bank and the counterparts who will be extracting that information. So you have to look at it from an ecosystem point of view, not just from the financial service provider point of view. Do you agree with that, Ammar?
Have we lost you, Ammar? Are you still with us?
I think it's muted. Ammar, you have to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my question actually was in regards to, in my context, in my country, in Sudan, we don't have a privacy, data privacy regulations per se. Okay, and there is a rise in the fintech ecosystem. So from banks or small companies that are entering that space. However, I'm a strong believer in privacy by design. So when you design a product, you have to think of privacy from the start. So your blueprint has to actually include the privacy piece, which is not there today. So there is a big exposure, a big risk to customers. And to be honest, there is a big risk to institutions as well, because data privacy goes hand in hand with data protection, correct? So I think both transacting parties are at risk of data breach or any other risks. So my question was, when there is no regulation, when there is no law governing privacy and protection, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, at that point, if there's no law, then any responsible financial institution would want to be looking at what are best practices in other countries. And in essence, I think the easiest in that case would be, if you want to be a responsible financial service provider, is just pick a country that you think has a good privacy framework and pretend that you fall under that jurisdiction. So instead of making up your own rules, just, let's pretend that I'm, whichever country you want to pick. Maybe don't pick Europe if you're in Sudan with GDPR and everything, but maybe you want to, maybe you like and think it's enough by the standards of your customers to pick what Tanzania is doing, or Kenya, or Nigeria, or whichever one you think is a good model, and just pretend that that applies to you.
And Ammar, it might help you tomorrow, because we're going to switch. So today was a lot of our discussions were focused around views on what privacy is, whether what we're concerned about more from a user perspective. But tomorrow we're going to try and shift the conversation actually to look at examples of organizations, policies, regulations from across the world that are trying, or maybe, I don't know, we can have some bad examples as well, and we can learn from, and some good examples. So hopefully tomorrow people will be sharing in the posts their practices, policies, suggestions for you, and that's something that you can, you know, go and have and look at and contribute and join the conversation on this tomorrow as well.
Excellent. I look forward to it. Thank you, Sarah.
Perfect. Anyone else got any questions? We're getting close to the end of the hour. We have 8 minutes left. Anyone else have anything that they would love to share with us? Candice apparently says you can pick Tanzania. They've got some good rules. So Candice, you better join us online tomorrow to tell us what those are. That okay?
Yes, I will. I've got some interesting stories also, if you'll allow me to share them.
Of course. So are they going to be regulation based for tomorrow?
Yeah, it's some of the privacy challenges that we've faced with mobile financial services in Tanzania. But I'll save that. They're interesting stories. I'll try and post them on the.
Fantastic. Thank you, Candice.
Or Candice, if you prefer, instead of writing, just do a little video of yourself explaining that. We'll put it up.
Ignacio, I would love to, but I had to have a haircut at home this week, okay? So I don't want to submit you guys to my video.
Wait, I thought Africans didn't care about privacy. Now you care about us seeing your hair.
So that's where your
let me Sarah, if I could come back to the point that we tend to look at privacy too much from data point of view, data protection, data this, data that. But again, it's that image. I want to be the one who creates my image. And if someone takes data from me little by little and constructs a view of me that is not me, that I feel is going to go against my interests, that's where the problem was. So let me go back to this idea of me going into your bathroom and taking a picture of while you're in the bathroom. You know, what data violation happened? Absolutely none. And yet it's deeply upsetting from a privacy point of view.
Absolutely. And I know, I think for me, just thinking about how I was preparing for today's session, you know, I was hoping that people were going to join us, which is the key thing, and chat, which has happened excellent. But I also made sure that I'd makeup before the session. And why? Well, actually, it's absolutely pointless, really, because so much of the conversation I have with all of you that have joined today happens, you know, online. And nobody even, maybe even some of you didn't even know what I look like. So it was completely pointless. But it gives you that sense of who you are, I guess. You know, I'm used to Sarah with straight hair, you know, and looking like this, and that's the image that I want to portray. So it is really interesting how we all have that line, that barrier, that view of ourselves, and that if someone thinks differently from us, that creates a grate for us. And you know, that's where a lot of these, you know, being unhappy with how people have see us or interpret who we are, or you know, used our information in some way, makes us unhappy.
Right. So I'll take reviews from people, whether you like my new longer hair. But this is how it's going to work. If you're going to say you like it, you're free to say it publicly. If you're going to criticize it, then please say it privately to me only. You see, privacy is about bad news. Privacy is about things not working out. Privacy is there for when you don't trust. Privacy is for when you want to criticize. Privacy is when you, it's not for when things work. So I'm referring, for example, to the comment Masud made, I mean, very rightly, that it should be okay that data makes an image of you that is, no, actually, that's a different point. I take that back. Well, yeah, no, let me just, I reread that point as a different one, sorry. But anyway, hair reviews, please.
Well, of course, I have to say it looks lovely, Ignacio.
I've got to read you Gavin's private message to me. Nutty professor, it suits you.
But obviously you're comfortable with the idea of being seen that way, Ignacio, because you shared it with us.
Yeah, because that actually what Gavin said matches the perception that I would like people to have of me, whether it's true or not. I'm not nutty at all, but I kind of like the idea. I think I'm a nutty professor. I loved it. And so I reveal it.
And isn't that interesting? You know, we all do reveal, we reveal what we want to about ourselves, and when things are convenient for us as well, which kind of, you know, comes back to some of the early points in the conversation.
Yes, yes.
Anyone else have any questions or comments in our last 3 minutes, or do we end on a high note where we're all laughing about our hairstyles?
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Rehema.
Okay, I find it very complicated. Privacy is okay when it's not breached, but it becomes crazy when something happens which is not as agreed. Yesterday, I was trying to register myself on one platform for fintech, and then at the end of the registration, they were saying I should verify myself, and then verification, I should put either my ID, my passport, and it's not a number, but I have to put a picture of my ID. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I did that, but after registration and done all those verification is when I realized, what, am I safe? Why did I put my passport detail on the online platform that I don't even know about? But also I can recall one of the representative here talk about the trust, yeah? So at the end of the day, I was just consoling myself that, okay, I trust the platform. I don't even know the people behind the platform. So I think also there is another guy who was talking about the limitation, yeah? Until what point that I'm safe into sharing things that can breach my privacy and then can work against me. Because at the end of the day, if for someone with all the technology now, we know they are hackers. Company can be putting my data safe, but someone can go into the system and do something with my data, and then the privacy can be breached. So I think the privacy issue is very complicated, unless, like Ignacio mentioned, that we have a governing body that is helping us to be intermediary between us and other people who we are sharing the details with them. Otherwise, we will still see so many issues regarding privacy breach, and that will affect personalities of people. Although it is important because it helps in making decisions for some companies, etc.
Thanks, Rehema. And I think it's a really nice reminder that it doesn't matter who you are. You can, sometimes we all do things that we think afterwards, oh, should I have done? And, you know, I'm also reminds me of, you know, looking at education. I mean, we talk about how financial literacy and numeracy are stumbling blocks in digital finance, and we've spoken about those quite a bit. These also have a massive implication when it comes to understanding what privacy is, whether you do have a choice or don't have a choice to share certain information in order to gain access to things like maybe a mobile money wallet or a bank account. You know, how much are people aware, know about privacy? And one of the things that I'm going to sort of wrap up with from my side before I pass it over to Ignacio is I really loved, and it's still resonating with me. And so if I'm still thinking about it this far on, I know it's an idea that I'd like to pursue. Is Kevin's idea of having our own personal protection policies, privacy protection policies. And Kevin suggested, you know, should we as a group do that? So I love the idea, and I'm going to post in our privacy discussion a new post that we can all start sharing, maybe questions or principles, you know, that we might all want to adopt in our own personal privacy policy. I think that's a nice thing that could come out from our discussion. So I'm going to share, along with this live recording and a bit of a summary of what we talked about, I'm going to share that post, Kevin. So I expect that, Kevin, you're the first one to post in there later. And yeah, just a reminder, we've got lots of posts in the discussion. So go in, join the, there's some polls. I'll share the poll responses a little bit later with everybody too. Just give us your thoughts online, but also again, we'll be online to have this conversation focus a little bit more about policies, legislation, regulations, etc. will be online again at 3 o'clock. So from my side, thank you everybody for joining us. And I'm going to hand over to Ignacio to finish off his wrap up of the call.
No, just thank everybody. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you all. Sarah, congratulations to you on CDFP graduation.
Yes.
Thank you, Fahad. I'm so excited. I get to join you and the others who finished CDFP.
Yes, it's a great feeling, and I found that from Facebook.
There we go.
we need these platforms as well that inspires us. So,
Sarah, you got
Absolutely,
your certificate before me.
Yeah, I did, Ignacio. Yes.
I'm certified.
Well, what a lovely way to end the call, reminding us of the powers of Facebook.
Thank you.
Everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.